As usual, if you like these stories or it felt meaningful to you, feel free to like, share, and comment your thoughts below, as well as subscribe to our channel. It could be a huge support for our work. Now, let's just enjoy the stories.
Gunfire shatters the silence of a sunny Tuesday afternoon, turning a sprawling estate into a war zone. In the middle of the chaos stands a terrified 22-year-old girl holding a weeping child. She wasn't hired to die, but in exactly 3 seconds, she will make a choice that rewrites Mafia history. Nora Dempsey did not belong in the gilded, terrifying world of the Bianchi family. She was simply a girl drowning in the crushing reality of a $45,000 medical debt. Her father, a retired mechanic from Queens, was battling idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis at Mount Sinai Hospital. Every breath he took cost money Nora didn't have. Desperation had driven her to a high-end staffing agency, Elite Domestics, which specialized in placing discreet, background-checked staff in the homes of the ultra-wealthy. That was how she ended up at Blackwood Manor, a sprawling, heavily fortified estate in upstate New York, working as a maid for Lorenzo Bianchi. Lorenzo was officially the CEO of Bianchi Logistics, an international shipping conglomerate. Unofficially, he was the ruthless head of the most powerful syndicate on the East Coast. He was a man carved from cold marble, with sharp jawlines, tailored Brioni suits, and eyes the color of a winter storm. He spoke little, smiled less, and carried an aura of absolute authority that made even the toughest men in his employ lower their gazes when he walked into a room. Nora's instructions on her first day were painfully clear. Keep your head down, clean the rooms, do not ask questions, and above all, never ever interfere with the boss's son. Leo Bianchi was 6 years old, but he carried the heavy, silent sorrow of an old man. 3 years ago, his mother, Camilla, had died in a violent car explosion, a targeted hit by the rival Romano family that was meant for Lorenzo. Since that day, Leo hadn't spoken a single word. He was a ghost in his own home, shadowed constantly by armed guards and a strict, unsmiling nanny named Greta, who treated the child more like a fragile porcelain doll than a little boy. For the first 2 months, Nora adhered strictly to the rules. She polished the mahogany banisters, scrubbed the imported Italian marble floors, and ironed Lorenzo's shirts to perfection. She existed in the periphery, an invisible gear in the massive machine of Blackwood Manor. But Nora had a soft heart, and it broke a little more every time she saw Leo. The shift happened on a rainy Thursday in late October. Nora was dusting the expansive library when she found Leo sitting on the Persian rug, surrounded by a 500-piece puzzle of the solar system. Greta was sitting in an armchair nearby, completely absorbed in her phone. Leo was visibly frustrated, his small hands shaking as he tried to jam a piece of Jupiter into the dark expanse of space. Without thinking about the rules, Nora knelt beside him. She didn't speak. She simply reached out, gently turned the puzzle piece 90 degrees, and guided his hand to slide it perfectly into place. Leo flinched initially, his wide, dark eyes darting up to her face. Nora offered him a small, reassuring smile, smelling of lemon polish and clean cotton. Slowly, the tension left the boy's shoulders. For the next 20 minutes, the two of them worked in comfortable silence, finishing the gas giant together. When Nora finally stood up to leave, she felt a tiny tug on her apron. Leo was looking up at her, handing her a single puzzle piece, a star as a silent thank you. From that day on, an unspoken bond formed. Whenever Greta wasn't looking, Nora would sneak Leo extra chocolate chip cookies from the kitchen. She would leave small origami animals on his nightstand. She became a sliver of warmth in a house entirely consumed by ice and violence. Lorenzo, however, missed nothing. One evening, Nora was finishing her shift in the dining room when she felt the sudden, crushing weight of a presence behind her. She turned to find Lorenzo standing in the doorway, a glass of amber scotch in his hand. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his eyes speaking of wars fought in boardrooms and back alleys. "You overstep your boundaries, Miss Dempsey," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. Nora swallowed hard, clutching her dusting cloth. I apologize, Mr. Bianchi. I was just. I know exactly what you are doing, he interrupted, taking a slow step into the room. I review the security footage. I see the origami birds. I see the extra time you spend in the West Wing. He stopped mere inches from her. Up close, he was intimidatingly tall, smelling of expensive cologne and gunmetal. My son is not a charity case. He does not need your pity. It's not pity, Nora fired back, surprising herself with her own audacity. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she held her ground. He's a lonely little boy in a house full of people who treat him like a VIP package instead of a child. He just needs someone to treat him like he's normal. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lorenzo stared at her, his eyes narrowing. In his world, people who spoke to him with such defiance usually ended up buried in the Pine Barrens. But as he looked at this slight, trembling girl in a maid's uniform, something unreadable flickered in his gaze. If you ever speak to me with that tone again, Lorenzo warned softly, you will find yourself looking for employment elsewhere. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Nora whispered, lowering her eyes. Lorenzo turned and walked away, but the dynamic had shifted. He didn't fire her, and secretly, he didn't stop her from leaving the origami birds. Over the next few weeks, the tension within the estate grew palpable. The security detail doubled. Nora began noticing heavily armed men patrolling the gardens at all hours. She overheard snippets of conversations between Lorenzo and his terrifying underboss, Matteo Russo. Words like territory, retaliation, and Romano syndicate echoed through the heavy oak doors of Lorenzo's study. War was brewing, and Blackwood Manor was the fortress. Nora's debt was also catching up to her. Her father's condition worsened, and the hospital was threatening to move him to a lower-tier care facility unless a substantial payment was made. She was cracking under the pressure, functioning on 3 hours of sleep a night, terrified of losing the only family she had left. She didn't know that her world and the dangerous world of the Bianchis were about to violently collide. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was a brilliant, deceptive blue. Lorenzo was supposed to be at a high-level sit-down in Manhattan, but a last-minute tip from a corrupt NYPD detective, Officer David Higgins, had warned him of a potential trap. Lorenzo had stayed behind, locking himself in his ground-floor office with Matteo and 2 other capos. Nora was in the sunroom, a bright, glass-walled extension at the back of the manor overlooking the sprawling gardens. She was supposed to be cleaning the massive arched windows. Leo was sitting on the plush rug in the center of the room, diligently working on a new puzzle she had bought him, with her meager savings, a picture of a golden retriever. Greta, the nanny, had stepped out to the kitchen to take a personal phone call, leaving Nora alone with the boy. The first sign that something was wrong was the sound of screaming engines. Nora paused, the glass cleaner halfway to the pane. She looked out toward the front driveway just in time to see 3 matte black SUVs crash straight through the reinforced wrought iron gates of Blackwood Manor. The heavy metal groaned and snapped like twigs. Before her brain could fully process the sight, the front doors of the SUVs burst open. Dozens of men in tactical gear poured out, carrying automatic weapons. The Romano family had not waited for a trap in Manhattan. They had brought the war directly to the king's castle. Crack, crack, crack. The deafening roar of gunfire erupted. The beautiful, serene quiet of the estate was instantly torn to shreds. Down the hall, Nora heard the heavy, booming return fire of Lorenzo's guards. Alarms began to blare, a high-pitched, terrifying wail that rattled Nora's teeth. "Leo!" Nora screamed over the noise, dropping her cleaning supplies. The 6-year-old was frozen, his hands covering his ears, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it paralyzed him. The trauma of his mother's explosive death was replaying right in front of him. "Leo, we have to move!" Nora lunged forward, grabbing the boy by his sweater. She needed to get him to the designated safe room in the basement, a protocol she had read in the staff handbook but never thought she'd use. She scooped his trembling body into her arms and ran toward the hallway doors. But as she burst through them, a spray of bullets shattered the antique chandelier above, raining razor-sharp glass down on them. Nora shielded Leo with her body, taking the brunt of the cuts on her arms and back. The main foyer was a war zone. Marble pillars were chipping away under heavy fire. Smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Through the chaos, Nora saw Lorenzo burst from his office, a customized Sig Sauer in his hand, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying wrath. He dropped 2 Romano hitmen with lethal precision, his eyes scanning the chaos frantically for his son. "Lorenzo!" Nora tried to shout, but her voice was lost in the deafening crossfire. She turned to run back toward the east corridor, hoping to find a clear path to the basement. She clutched Leo so tightly her arms ached, whispering frantic, breathless promises into his hair. "I've got you, buddy. I've got you. Just close your eyes." They rounded the corner into the gallery hallway, lined with priceless Renaissance paintings. It seemed empty for a split second, but then a figure stepped out from behind a marble statue at the end of the hall. He wore a ski mask, and in his hands was a suppressed submachine gun. The hitman didn't care that he was looking at a maid and a child. To the Romanos, ending the Bianchi bloodline was the ultimate victory. The man raised his weapon, the dark barrel pointing directly at Leo's small head. Time seemed to slow down, stretching into agonizing, viscous seconds. Nora saw the hitman's finger tighten on the trigger. There was no time to run. There was no time to turn back. There was no one close enough to save them. In that fraction of a second, Nora didn't think about her unpaid bills. She didn't think about her father in the hospital. She only thought about the little boy who had given her a paper star, the boy who had already lost his mother to this ugly, violent world. She twisted her body violently, shoving Leo hard onto the floor, tucking his head down, and threw herself entirely over him, becoming a human shield. The gun fired. 1, 2, 3. The first bullet tore through the back of Nora's left shoulder, shattering the scapula. The impact felt like being struck by a freight train swinging a sledgehammer. The air was ripped from her lungs in a choked gasp. The second bullet punched through her right side, cracking 2 ribs and tearing through muscle. The third bullet grazed her lower spine, a burning, white-hot line of agony that sent a shockwave of numbness down her legs. Nora collapsed onto the Persian rug, her body completely covering Leo's. She didn't scream. The pain was too vast, too absolute, stealing her voice. She stared at the intricate patterns of the rug as her vision began to blur at the edges, a creeping darkness threatening to pull her under. "Nora." A tiny, broken voice whispered from beneath her. It was the first time Leo had spoken in 3 years. "Stay down." Nora managed to wheeze, tasting copper in her mouth. Footsteps pounded down the hall. Lorenzo had rounded the corner just in time to see Nora dive. He saw the muzzle flashes. He saw the maid fall. With a roar that sounded more beast than man, Lorenzo raised his weapon and emptied the rest of his magazine into the hitman, dropping him instantly. Lorenzo didn't even pause to watch the body hit the floor. He sprinted toward the crumpled pile on the rug. He fell to his knees, his expensive suit soaking up the mess blooming across the floor. He gently, frantically rolled Nora to the side. Underneath her, Leo was completely untouched, shivering and crying, but alive. Lorenzo looked at Nora. Her face was chalk white, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Her maid's uniform was ruined. She had taken 3 rounds meant for his flesh and blood. "Matteo, get the Escalade to the side door." "Now!" Lorenzo roared into his earpiece, his voice cracking with a panic his men had never heard before. He scooped Nora up into his arms. She felt impossibly light. Leo clung to his father's leg, sobbing. "Stay with me, ragazza. Do you hear me? You do not close your eyes," Lorenzo commanded, sprinting through the smoke-filled halls as his men secured the perimeter. They piled into the heavily armored Cadillac Escalade. Matteo floored the accelerator, tearing across the ruined lawn and onto the highway. Lorenzo held Nora in the back seat, his hands pressing desperately against her wounds. "Hospital," Nora whispered, her eyes fluttering. "Dad, you're going to a doctor." "My doctor," Lorenzo said, his jaw locked. He couldn't take her to a public hospital. The police, the feds, the Romanos, they would all be swarming. 10 minutes later, the SUV skidded to a halt inside a subterranean parking garage in the city. They rushed her into the private, high-tech clinic of Dr. Harrison Sterling, the syndicate's elite underground surgeon. Dr. Sterling took one look at Nora and went pale. "Lorenzo, she's losing too much quickly. I need to perform a massive transfusion and an experimental thoracic surgery to get that bullet near her spine, but I can't do it." "What do you mean you can't do it?" "Fix her," Lorenzo shouted, grabbing the doctor by the collar. "Lorenzo, listen to me," Sterling barked back. "This isn't one of your soldiers. She's a civilian. The state requires next-of-kin consent for the experimental spinal procedure I need to do to save her life and prevent paralysis. If she dies on my table without a legal proxy, I lose my license, my clinic, and I go to prison for murder. I need a family member to sign off, or I am legally bound to transfer her to a state hospital and she won't survive the ambulance ride." Lorenzo stared at the dying girl on the gurney. She was a nobody to the world, a maid, a girl with crippling debt, but she had just given her life for his son. In Lorenzo's world, loyalty was the highest currency, and a debt of blood was absolute. He pulled out his phone and dialed his mob lawyer, Arthur Penhaligon. "Arthur," Lorenzo growled, his eyes fixed on Nora's pale face. "Draft a marriage certificate, call the judge on our payroll, backdate it to this morning." "Boss, a marriage certificate? For who?" Arthur stammered on the other end. "For me," Lorenzo said coldly, wiping his hands on his ruined suit. "And Nora Dempsey, send it to Dr. Sterling's clinic immediately. She is my wife. And she gets the absolute protection of the Bianchi family." The world returned to Nora in fragmented, agonizing bursts of white light and the rhythmic, sterile beeping of a heart monitor. Her mouth tasted like cotton and ash, and her body felt as though it had been encased in wet cement. She tried to move her fingers, gasping as a sharp, electric jolt of pain radiated from her left shoulder all the way down to her lower spine. "Do not try to move. You have 42 stitches in your back and a titanium plate near your T12 vertebra." The voice was low, gravelly, and commanded absolute obedience. Nora forced her heavy eyelids open. The room was not a standard hospital ward. It looked like a luxury hotel suite, save for the IV poles, the advanced telemetry monitors, and the distinct smell of medical-grade antiseptics. Sitting in a leather armchair beside her bed was Lorenzo Bianchi. He looked terrifyingly out of place. His usually immaculate Brioni suit was crumpled and stained with dried, dark rust, her blood. The shadow of a 3-day beard darkened his sharp jawline, and his winter storm eyes were bloodshot, locked onto her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Leo," Nora rasped, her voice sounding like crushed glass. "He is completely unharmed," Lorenzo said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The relief in his voice was a raw, unpolished thing. "He is safe, because of you." Nora let her head fall back against the pillows, a tear slipping down her pale cheek. "The hitman, dead. And his entire family will follow him shortly," Lorenzo stated, his tone devoid of emotion, yet carrying a promise of catastrophic violence. He stood up, towering over the bed, and poured a small cup of water from a pitcher, bringing the straw to her dry lips. "Drink slowly." After she took a few agonizing sips, her mind began to clear enough to process the reality of her situation. "Mr. Bianchi, I need to leave. I can't afford this. My insurance won't cover a private clinic, and my father—" "Your father is currently resting in the VIP pulmonary wing at Mount Sinai," Lorenzo interrupted smoothly. "He is under the direct care of Dr. Eris Weber, the top respiratory specialist on the East Coast. His $45,000 medical debt was cleared yesterday morning by my accountant." Nora stared at him, her heart rate spiking on the monitor beside her. "What? Why would you do that?" Lorenzo reached into the inner pocket of his ruined suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment paper. He laid it gently on the edge of her bed. "Because, Nora, as of 3 days ago, you are no longer just a maid in my employ. You are under the absolute protection of the Bianchi Syndicate." Trembling, Nora reached out with her good arm and pulled the paper toward her. It was a marriage certificate. bearing the signature of Judge Robert Caldwell, a man she recognized from the local news. It legally bound Nora Dempsey and Lorenzo Bianchi in matrimony. You married me?" she whispered, the sheer absurdity of the document making her head spin. "You forced a judge to marry us while I was unconscious?" Dr. Sterling needed to perform a highly experimental, unapproved thoracic surgery to remove the bullet lodged against your spinal cord, Lorenzo explained, his expression hardening. "Without it, you would have bled out or been permanently paralyzed from the waist down. He refused to operate without a legally recognized proxy to take the fall if you died. I was not going to let the woman who saved my son's life die on a technicality." Arthur Penhaligon, my attorney, drafted the papers. Caldwell signed them. It is legally ironclad. Nora's mind raced. She was married to a mafia boss, the most dangerous man in New York. This is insane. I'm a nobody. When the police find out, the police will find out nothing, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a low, soothing cadence. To the world, we had a quiet, sudden elopement. This marriage is your shield, Nora. The Romanos, the family that attacked my home, they know what you did. They know you threw off their hit. Dominic Romano, their boss, will see you as a loose end or a tool to get to me. If you walk out of here as Nora Dempsey, you will be hunted. As Nora Bianchi, my wife, an attack on you is a declaration of total war against my entire syndicate. No one will dare touch you. And what happens to me now? She asked, her voice trembling. Do I just live in a gilded cage? Lorenzo's gaze softened, a rare, microscopic vulnerability breaking through his marble facade. You recover. You live your life. You have access to my resources, my men, and my wealth. You will never scrub another floor, and your father will never lack for care. In return, you play the part when necessary, but most importantly, he paused, looking toward the heavy mahogany door of the clinic room. You stay with him. The door pushed open slowly. Standing there, holding the hand of Matteo Russo, the towering underboss, was Leo. The 6-year-old let go of Matteo's hand and ran to the side of Nora's bed. He didn't cry this time. He reached up, his small fingers gently grasping her uninjured hand. Mama Nora, Leo whispered, his voice clear and unbroken. Nora completely shattered. She squeezed his hand, sobbing quietly as Lorenzo watched them, a silent vow cementing in the Mafia king's heart. She had bled for his family. Now he would burn the world down to protect hers. Recovery was a grueling, agonizing battle. For 2 months, Nora lived within the fortified walls of Lorenzo's penthouse in Manhattan, undergoing intense physical therapy to regain the strength in her legs and shoulder. The titanium plate in her back ached when it rained, a constant physical reminder of the Tuesday that changed her life. Her relationship with Lorenzo shifted from a cold, terrifying employer-employee dynamic into something far more complex. He was fiercely protective, ensuring her father's medical updates were delivered to her personally every morning. They spent late nights in his study, drinking tea while he pored over syndicate ledgers. She realized Lorenzo was not a monster by choice, but a king trapped in a violent ecosystem he had inherited. However, the war with the Romanos was still raging in the shadows, and Nora, with her sharp mind and unassuming nature, was about to prove she was far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. It happened in late December. Nora was sitting in the penthouse living room, reviewing the security logs. Lorenzo had given her access to the household operations to keep her mind busy. As she cross-referenced the guard rotations from the day of the attack at Blackwood Manor, a chilling realization washed over her. She remembered Greta, the nanny. Greta had stepped out of the sunroom to take a personal phone call exactly 3 minutes before the Romano SUVs crashed through the gates. Furthermore, looking at the digital logs, the mansion's primary gate sensors had been manually overridden from inside the house just moments before the breach. Greta's access code was the one used. Nora didn't panic. She didn't scream. The girl who had scrubbed floors was gone. The woman who had taken 3 bullets was forged in steel. She waited until Lorenzo returned from a sit-down in Brooklyn. He walked into the penthouse, looking exhausted, shedding his cashmere overcoat. Lorenzo, Nora said, standing up from the sofa. She walked toward him without her cane for the first time in weeks. "We need to talk about Greta." Lorenzo stopped, his eyes narrowing instantly. Greta was relocated to a safe house after the attack. Why? Nora handed him the printed security logs and laid out her theory with cold, calculated precision. She detailed the phone call, the gate override, and the timing. "The Romanos didn't breach your security, Lorenzo. They were invited in. Greta sold you out. She sold Leo out." The temperature in the room plummeted. Lorenzo stared at the papers, the muscles in his jaw ticking rhythmically. The betrayal was absolute. For a moment, Nora saw the ruthless, terrifying mafia boss the rest of the world feared. But when he looked up at her, his eyes held a profound respect. "Matteo," Lorenzo said, not raising his voice, though the underboss immediately stepped into the room from the hallway. "Bring Greta to the warehouse at the docks, and send the word to the capos. Tonight, we end the Romano family." The retaliation was swift, surgical, and devastating. Utilizing the information extracted from the traitorous nanny, Lorenzo's forces launched a coordinated strike against Dominic Romano's illicit operations across the eastern seaboard. In a single night, the Romano syndicate was dismantled, their leadership wiped off the board, and the threat to Nora and Leo was permanently extinguished. When Lorenzo returned to the penthouse at dawn, he found Nora awake, sitting by the expansive windows overlooking the waking city. Leo was asleep on the sofa nearby, draped in a thick blanket. Lorenzo walked over and sat heavily in the chair opposite her. He had blood on his cuffs, but his posture was finally relaxed. The war was over. "It's done," he said quietly, his eyes searching her face. "You are safe. Your father is safe. You don't have to pretend anymore, Nora. If you want a quiet life, I will give you the money, and I will let you walk away. I can have Arthur annul the papers." Nora looked at the man sitting before her. He was steeped in darkness, a king of shadows, yet he had moved heaven and earth to save her life and protect her father. She looked at the sleeping boy who called her mother. She didn't want the quiet life anymore. She wanted the family she had bled for. She reached across the small table, her fingers gently tracing the bruises on his knuckles. "I'm not going anywhere, Lorenzo," she said softly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "A Bianchi never runs from a fight, right?" Lorenzo's breath hitched. For the first time since she had met him, a genuine, breathtaking smile broke across his face. He turned his hand over, intertwining his fingers with hers, holding on as if she were his anchor in the storm. In the end, the girl who owed $45,000 paid her debt in blood and bravery. Nora didn't just survive the crossfire. She rose from the ashes of it, transforming from a terrified maid into the undisputed queen of the Bianchi syndicate. She proved that sometimes the most powerful armor a king can wear is the unwavering loyalty of the woman standing beside him.